As we may know, if you own a piece of land or property in Ghana, then you most likely have a lease. And I know many people wonder what happens after the lease on their land or property expires. Will the land go back to the original owner? What if there's a building on the land? So the truth of the matter is that we have a law in Ghana, which is the Lands Act, which outlines what we should expect after a lease has ended. But this law was passed in the year 2021. So before 2021, what happened, especially in practice? What happened in real life? So in terms of real life examples of what should happen after a lease has ended, there aren't many examples that we can actually draw lessons from. And this is because, as we all know, leases do last for such a long time. So imagine that a lease can last for up to 99 years. And many of our neighborhoods are not that old, or our real estate industry in general is not that old. So many of our neighborhoods began to develop in, say, in the 1970s, in the 1980s, some in the 1990s, some in the 2000s. So that period is not up to 99 years. And so there aren't many examples of leases expiring, especially for residential lands in our customary land, that we can draw lessons from. But there are also instances where leases have ended or expired that we can draw lessons from. So if you go to the very commercial part of Accra, you find out that leases do last for relatively short periods, some up to 30 years. Also, we all know that non-citizens, when they buy land, they can only get a lease of up to 50 years. Then we also have public lands. So public lands too, when you buy public lands, the leases on public lands are relatively shorter. So in that regard, there are some examples that we can draw lessons from. So when a lease ends, what's the most logical direction to take, or what is expected to happen? And this is what even our courts will recommend, is that the parties, that is the original owners of the land and the lessee who is occupying the land now, they will have to negotiate for the renewal of the lease for a fresh lease term. So this negotiation often involves how much premium to be paid to the original landowners, and also how long the new lease should last. And this often can lead to disagreements and all of that. So what some lawyers will usually advise their clients to do is that when at the time of purchasing the land, you negotiate for a renewal clause in the lease agreement, so that once the lease ends, the process of renewing the lease becomes much more simpler and smoother. But this is what the Lands Act actually says. So the framers of the Lands Act envisaged that sometime in the future, when lease expiries become much more common, our legal system may be overwhelmed with many litigation issues concerning leases and all of that. So they provided in the law what we should expect after a lease has ended. So the Lands Act makes a distinction between an indigene, a citizen, and a non-citizen. So let's say you're an indigene, you buy land, you get a lease. After the lease has ended, it is expected that the lease is renewed automatically. So as an indigene, you are entitled to an automatic renewal of your lease after the lease has ended. But I know one may ask, who even is an indigene? Or what's the difference between an indigene and a citizen? So an indigene is a person who originates, or who is a native of a certain part of the country. And this is often defined by customary law. So, for instance, accounts are matrilineal, Ghana Danbase are patrilineal, and so on and so forth. So you can actually be a citizen of Ghana, but not an indigene of where your land is located. So if you are a citizen and you acquire land, you have a lease, but you are not an indigene of that area, then upon expiry of that lease, then the renewal of that lease is implied, but not automatic. So it is expected that the lease is renewed for you, but the parties would have to sit to negotiate for the new terms of the lease. But if the land you occupy as a citizen is public land, public lands are not for some group of indigenous people, it is for the entire citizenry. Then also your renewal of that lease can be automatic, except that if the property that sits on the land is a commercial property, then you are not entitled to that automatic renewal. But if you're a non-Ghanaian, then the law does not really guarantee any renewal of your lease after the lease has expired. Unless that at the time you were buying the land, you were able to negotiate for a renewal clause in the lease agreement. Then upon expiry, you can be guaranteed of a new lease, a renewal of a lease. So as we've seen, our law, the land laws in Ghana try to favor or it discriminates in favor of indigents and also citizens. But this is what the law is saying. As I said, in terms of real life examples, especially when it comes to customary lands in our residential areas, there aren't many examples that we can draw lessons from. So I hope you've learned something from this video. As always, don't forget to like the video and also share to others.